Kratos, the god of war and one of the most iconic characters in gaming, and his blades of chaos even more so. However, modern Kratos really has a rough history with those blades. I mean, he murdered his first wife and child with them, and then he destroyed the world. And so that's why in God of War 2018 he puts away the blades and uses this axe, the Leviathan Axe. But really, that axe was his wife's, and she's dead now, and so it feels wrong kind of getting it so messy. I mean, that's an heirloom. He has a son. He's got to keep that in good condition. Speaking of that son, he's a minor. He's like, what, 10? We shouldn't be commanding him to fight unless we have absolutely no other choice. Otherwise, that's child endangerment. So, today, we're going to beat God of War 2018 without using the Leviathan Axe, the Blade of Chaos, or any of Atreus' arrows, except for required puzzles, because we're also not using glitches. The rules of this run are simple. We will play on challenging, because I'm not that good at the game. We will not ever attack any enemy with the axe or blades, we won't throw the axe in combat, and we will not grab enemies with the chain. Solving required puzzles with the weapons is allowed, but we are going to do none of the optional puzzles with the exception of Nornir chests, because again, I'm not that good at this game. If I absolutely cannot progress, then I will use Atreus' arrows before using the axe, because keeping my weapons and morals clean is the #1 priority. So, what can we do? Well, we can block, we can parry, we can punch, and we can use all of Spartan Rage. The range is short, attacks are slower, and our damage is really low, but we make up for it with some great knockback and a pretty decent stun buildup. The first fights in the game, though, don't allow stun, which means we have to whittle down these Draugr hit by hit. On challenging, they can two-shot us, and the arena is really small, so playing it safe is the way to go. Land a couple hits, then back off to keep them all in front of you. Landing parries is huge in this run. Any successful parry staggers every enemy nearby, which creates a huge window for us to land a combo. Most hits of our basic unarmed combo will only hit one target, but the last shield strike can hit a wide area and knock enemies back. The next couple fights are all pretty similar. Play patiently and don't get surrounded. The next notable fight is, of course, the troll boss, and he's not that bad. Just use full combos and dodge roll to the side whenever he attacks. This troll doesn't have any special tricks or mobs to complicate the fight, so you can really just wail on it without worrying about anything catching you too off guard. Once the troll goes down, though, you're immediately put into the next boss fight with Baldur. Now this is where the fists start to work a little less well. The first couple phases go by just fine, but we have so little stagger on our fists that we often don't get full combos off on phase 3. Considering how easy this fight is supposed to be compared to the real battle against Baldur, this lack of stagger or damage is definitely going to become a problem later in the game. Starting our actual journey, it's more of the same for a while until we run into our first stone wall. Now there are these ranged Draugr who stand out of punching range and throw projectiles. After we get 3000 XP, we'll be able to get the shield upgrade to throw ranged attacks back on a successful parry. But even doing all content possible without using the axe, every lore item, every artifact that we can grab, we are still way behind that 3000 XP mark needed to unlock that skill, so Atreus has to earn his first kill here. In the next big fight, though, we start to use our primary ally this run, gravity. If we can land a full combo, the last hit knocks small enemies back and off cliffs, which is going to be huge for taking enemies out quickly. Bigger enemies, though, can't be knocked off the cliff until they're at low health, but filling the Hammer Bros stun meter lets us grab them and toss them off the ledge. It can be tough to keep up the necessary aggression on these guys without Atreus' arrows to keep their stun meter up while you have to dodge other enemies, but with some good placement and enemy RNG, it is possible. Another couple enemies standing above us does mean Atreus does need to get another 2 kills, as we still aren't quite at that 3000 XP mark. The early game continues to throw curveballs at us, though, with the introduction of Revenants. Without arrows, there is no way to take them down. You can parry, but they still dodge, and the activation of Spartan Rage only gives you enough stagger to land 1 or 2 hits. But that's so little of its health that it won't take us the whole way through. Unfortunately, we will need Atreus' help for every Revenant we run into. On the plus side, it does mean that we'll finally have enough XP to bounce projectiles back towards our enemies, meaning Atreus will only have to be getting his hands dirty with Revenants. Things somehow get even worse, though, as we are forced to use the axe in combat for the first time. When attacked by humans, Atreus hides in the corner and Kratos fights them all alone. At first, this fight is pretty easy, but there ends up being a group of ranged enemies. The first couple go down with our new parrying ability, but when there's just one left, the projectiles that this last enemy shoots are not real. They can't hit you, they can't damage you, and so you can't parry them. So for the first time, and the only time in the entire run, we have to throw our axe at an enemy, and it is a living person too, one of the only living people in the entire game. Then Atreus has the gall to be upset, just like I didn't have to ruin his mother's axe. Thankfully, after that, the rest of the forest does go by pretty smoothly. We find Brock and get our first upgrade, and pretty quickly reach our next boss fight. Our low damage definitely makes this troll much tougher than the first. It's almost impossible not to be surrounded, and being unable to parry most of the troll's attacks means we're dodging around the troll and swarms of projectiles. However, with a well-timed Spartan Rage and using parried projectiles to damage the troll and stagger him further, we're actually able to rush it down surprisingly smoothly. Before reaching the mountain, the only other fight that really deserves a mention is this ogre fight. It's super easy to get overwhelmed, but the large numbers actually work in your favor. By parrying the attack of the Draugr, you stun the ogre too, and by parrying the ogre and the Draugr, you're able to keep up aggression and borrow the ogre's unarmed strikes for more damage. We'll be using this trick every time we see an ogre. It becomes our top priority, and we need to fill up that stun meter. After that, Freya leads us to Alfheim, land of the flying enemies. Now with our enemies airborne, I imagine we won't be able to rely as heavily on gravity as we have been. Yeah, that's a lie. Alfheim is the easiest area in the game to use gravity in, and that's great because without it, the Dark Elves are incredibly irritating foes. They move fast, they have a ton of health and high levels, and they really love to dart around and surround you. On top of that, this area introduces explosive nightmares. Instead of parrying back their attacks or punching them, which is irritating enough in and of itself, I found holding your shield and doing a hop backwards once they ignite is the most reliable way to get through them without taking unnecessary damage. Most of Alfheim is straightforward as you climb your way on up, using the axe a frustrating number of times to solve puzzles. Everything changes though on the platform where you bring back the main bridge. First, this Dark Elf stays up out of range, and his projectile, though it can technically be parried usually, always aims in front of you and to the right. It does not matter if you're standing still, running forward, running backward, he is pinpoint accurate in his lack of accuracy. So Atreus' kill count has to rise again to 4 enemies. This is a stone ancient. It opens its chest, allowing you to throw your axe in, deal damage, and drop explosive rocks you can throw in to get a stun. However, if you're ever within melee range, the Ancient will immediately stop what it was doing and switch to an AoE attack where it becomes immune to all offense, meaning punching is impossible. Its main attack is a laser, which cannot be parried or deflected back. But before we use the axe, we will have to try Atreus' arrows because they technically, and I cannot emphasize that technically enough, deal damage. It is almost no damage, and the attacks are directional, so if Atreus decides to run behind the golem, he cannot deal damage as it opens up. I used all my XP on buffing Atreus' arrows, and got started on this nightmare of a fight. Halfway through the battle, Dark Elves do spawn in, so we toss those off the cliff and then head straight back to our rock. Thankfully, the rock in the center of the arena blocks the laser, so it's less a matter of dodging and skill and more a matter of patience. I don't know why, but I did get a stagger once it was at about 25% hit points. I didn't kill it, but it definitely felt good to burst through some of that health so close to the end. It did give me a big scare when it reached its last shard of health. The arrows did so little damage, and it looked like it stopped incrementing. I became scared that after 15 minutes of combat, it had all been for nothing. After all this time, I would have to chip my wife's axe on this stupid rock. Thankfully, this is an issue with every boss health bar in the game. Dealing as little damage as I do will reach a point where the health bar actually increases, then stops going down until the boss is dead. The enemy still takes damage normally, but you'll be seeing that same sliver a lot during the rest of this run. After that though, the rest of Alfheim is straightforward. Punch elves off a cliff, dodge back from nightmares, run past this entire cinematic section, and work your way to the boss. He moves fast, and in the last phase especially, it's almost impossible to land more than one hit at a time, but there's no catches to it. With enough patience, Svartalvor, or however you're supposed to say this stupid Dark Elf's name, can be punched to death. Svartaljofer. Svartaljofer? Svartaljofer. 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 Moving up the mountain is when the challenge starts to have less exceptions, but it also gets much tougher. The mountain introduces Burning Draugr. Now, when a Burning Draugr lights itself on fire, that fire persists until one of three things happen. First, if you hit it, it takes no damage, explodes to damage you, and then immediately reapplies the buff. In addition, the buff is active as soon as it starts the animation, not when the animation finishes. Because of this, it's not an ability you can tank through. Second, if you throw your axe and hit, the explosion deactivates. Though that's the intended solution, it also does not help us at all. Third, if you stagger them, the buff ends. So if you land a parry next to them, or reflect a projectile back at them, they'll open themselves up long enough to land some damage. They will eventually reapply the buff, which will make them immediately priority targets. Spartan Rage also lets you get past, but again, that's not always an option. There's one big issue, though. Burning Draugr changed their moveset from their base slashes and attacks, and most just use this unblockable, unparryable, explosive dash, and they will never stop. If there is only one of these enemies, the only thing you can do is Spartan Rage. The first place it becomes a significant problem is the Frost Troll boss fight. There are no ranged enemies in the fight, and these Burning Draugr spawn infinitely until the troll dies. On top of that, the Frost Troll is the first troll to have a follow-up to some of his slams, forcing you to dodge more than most of the trolls up to this point. However, staying aggressive ends up paying off. I don't use any of my resources as the fight starts, getting to the second phase with a full Spartan Rage bar. As soon as the Draugr start to become an issue, I use the Rage and unleash as much damage as I can, getting the troll pretty close to dead. It's a tough last hurrah, but enough small attacks do end up eventually taking it down. After that, it's just a matter of cleaning up survivors. The elevator rides feature more of the same Draugr, but with the ability to knock them off the ledge and ranged projectiles to parry onto them, we're in a much better place for fighting them in this environment. Eventually, we do reach the next obstacle, the dragon. Honestly, the dragon isn't much of a challenge at all, especially compared to what came just before. The first phase limits him to one easy-to-block attack, and then after taking a peaceful ride in its mouth, the next phase doesn't deal enough damage to threaten you. The damage does get much higher in the last phase, but it's gracefully short enough that you can just wail on him, then use uncrane unarmed combat to introduce him to an explosive rock and get the cool Kratos money shot. With the dragon dead, we finally reached the top of the tallest peak in Midgard. But that's not why we're here. We're here for the tallest mountain in the 9 realms, and we misread the travel guide. That's why you're supposed to ask for directions, but you know, classic dad moves right there. So, with our new beheaded friend, we need a chisel from a dead giant and the rune that will take us to Jotunheim. We head to the giant first and pretty quickly get tossed into some tough fights. This fight's second wave in particular has 2 ogres and a horde of Draugr. But if you can maintain your defense and time your parries, it's possible to gain control of one of the ogres and use it to take back the advantage. Next, however, is our first traveler, who makes for a really tough opponent even on their own. The shield comes up fast enough that we only have time for 1 or 2 hits, dragging the fight out. With enough aggression though, we can take it down before our health drops too far. Finally, we end up on an elevator with a pretty tight timer. As usual, the sprinting R2 and other knockback moves that we've unlocked at this point are really big here. We also end up with another Revenant that you need Atreus for, but most of the area is still pretty straightforward, especially compared to the mountain. We fight another troll, struggle against a horde of Wolver more than we did against the troll for some reason, and move on to the fight I was dreading. Magni and Modi do a ton of damage and attack at a pretty decent pace. On top of that, we're really starting to feel the drop-off in damage from the fists, and we're struggling to stay properly leveled with all the optional loot that we're missing. Modi in particular can get obnoxious with his shield, popping in to stop your counterattack at the worst moments. When you take 2 bars off their health bar, you have a short window to knock the other one down. With the damage of the axe, that's not usually a problem, but if Modi decides to go turtle mode, there's nothing we can do with our fists, and Magni will regain his health pretty easily. The first phase goes by relatively smoothly, and the second is more of the same. There are some more lethal attacks, but nothing that requires too much of an adjustment. Magni does start to use this grab attack more often, which requires you use Atreus to break it, which we're not doing because that's telling Atreus to attack. Considering how fast it comes out, it's just short of unavoidable damage. Checkpoints also start to come in handy here. All 3 phases of the fight have a separate checkpoint, which means landing one knockdown is enough to move to the next part. Which is great because Phase 3 is a doozy. Magni and Modi are not only at their most aggressive, but they gain a new attack where Modi is thrown into the air as a projectile. Now what you're supposed to do here is throw the axe to knock him out of the sky and punish him for massive damage, but what I have to do is turn and run as far as possible, hoping this doesn't consume half my health bar in a single blow. Combine that with Magni's grab attack, needing to keep their health bars balanced and not being able to resurrect if Atreus is down, and you end up with what is easily one of the hardest phases in the main story. If it weren't for the checkpoint at the start of this phase, this would easily be the hardest fight to reach the credits. However, we managed to reach the point where cutscene Kratos sees fit to sully the axe, and we take the chisel as our prize. At this point, though, Atreus gets violently sick, and it is time for the best sequence in the game. Returning home and faced with the ghosts of his past, Kratos picks up the Blades of Chaos to serve as backwarmers in Helheim. Now these enemies may not be as tough as the exploding Draugr, but there are so many low power enemies that you immediately feel the lack of crowd control that the Blades have. What used to be an almost free button mashing session becomes a drawn out exercise as you slowly whittle them all down one at a time. Though all the fights in Helheim certainly take longer, nothing sticks out as too difficult until the Bridge Keeper, who has plenty of health. On top of that, his teleportation makes him hard to land a full combo on, which means you'll rarely end up landing a stagger or filling his stun bar. Since he's built to show off the range of the blades, he ends up being out of range more often than not. The best way to do damage is to use Spartan Rage, where you remember what it looks like to deal damage again. The fight really escalates, however, when he starts summoning mobs. They were already frustrating enough, but grabbing the already small windows of opportunity to hit the boss is made even harder when these things are spawned infinitely. However, with enough defensive play and a couple recharges of Spartan Rage, the Bridge Keeper goes down, and Atreus is back on his feet. Heading into Tyr's Temple, we're immediately put into one of the hardest mob fights in the game. The unblockable Draugr slams aren't too bad on their own, particularly with this hole in the ground giving us somewhere to throw them into, but where it gets complicated is this horde of nightmares all shooting slightly mistimed projectiles that stagger you out and lower your level. Combined with these attacks, it becomes hard to parry nightmares while dodging unblockable waves, and hard to punish unblockable waves while avoiding swarms of nightmare shots. Keep away is still the name of the game here, using pillars as cover as we whittle down the nightmares whenever we have the chance. After helping your son solve a puzzle and teaching him to give up all of his weapons, we are already right back into another troll boss fight. This time, the duo of the Grendels of Ash and Frost. And honestly, though this is a long fight, it is much easier than the Bridge Keeper, and even easier than the massive fight that came just before. These two trolls have unique movesets where almost everything they do can be blocked and parried. Avoid their regeneration by swapping targets, and use blocks to avoid getting blinded by their dust attacks. If they ever spawn stones, definitely give them plenty of space because it is very easy to get surrounded if you aren't careful. You'll get multiple Spartan Rages over the course of the fight, and using them to deal reliable damage and heal will make the bosses go down without too much trouble at all, getting you the Black Rune. On our way back up the mountain, we run into a... Oh god, no, not again! I thought at first that we'd have to use the same arrow strategy, and I even started that my first attempt, but then I realized I had access to a Spartan Rage power that I didn't have before. Rocks! And holy cow, these rocks do some ridiculous damage to the Ancient. In fact, all Ancients in the world are now some of the simplest fights in the game. Just 1 or 2 boulders while using the talisman to recharge your rage, and the rocks are down in infinitely less time than before. After our son gets way too into the whole god thing, we run into Baldur, and cutscene Kratos finally agrees to use the correct weapons in this QTE event. I don't think you can lose this fight, but using these blades as climbing picks is the closest that cutscene Kratos gets to breaking the rules before being flung into Helheim. Now Helheim is pretty straightforward until we get onto this boat, which, allow me to say, I hate this boat. This section is an absolute nightmare without the Blades of Chaos. Since you aren't dealing damage fast enough to protect both bonfires, and you are somehow not able to fling Draugr off the sides of the boat, you have to use the blades to reignite the bonfires. The middle ground I decided on was that I could use the blades mid-combat, but only to reignite the fires. If I damaged any Draugr, I'd have to restart from the checkpoint. Thankfully, I never knowingly hurt a Draugr with my nice little back warmers here, but that doesn't mean this fight was easy. I fell off the boat plenty of times, which I had never even seen that animation before, and the section with 2 revenants forced us to break out Atreus' arrows yet again to finally finish this fight. It might be possible to do this section without the blades, but I certainly wasn't anywhere close to that. Escaping hell, it is time to wrap this whole thing up. Heading back to Tyr's temple for the final time, we get to show off Kratos' puzzle-solving skills before acquiring the Unity Stone and entering the final stretch of the game. The only obstacles left are fighting 4 waves of enemies to bring back the Jotunheim Tower, a little cinematic puzzle in Jormungandr, and then taking Baldur down for good. However, those 4 waves of enemies are no easy feat. The first wave is hordes of the poisoned sprinters, and parrying the jump attacks is the most reliable way to get a good damage spread. I also start trying to make some use of the shield burst attack to get some AoE damage, but it takes a long time to charge up, so parries are still the name of the game. I also use my resurrection stone here, which, to put it plainly, was a mistake. Namely, because these 2 dark elves were my hardest fight in the main story. They have 2 nightmares with them, which you have no time to parry with the 2 dark elf bosses running towards you. The only way I found to take them down is to use Spartan Rage on the nightmares instead of on the elves. The name of the game here is Patience, and focusing on the lower level dark elf. As his health drops down, he starts to dodge away faster, much like the first dark elf boss you fought, sometimes completely robbing you of the opportunity to land even a single hit. On top of that, the other dark elf will also be attacking, closing the opportunities even more. If you don't attack him though, his moveset stays pretty simple and easy to avoid. And with a ridiculous amount of patience and whittling them down, you can get it down to a one-on-one fight, making it a much simpler task of taking down the dark elf. The third wave is a horde of Draugr. Nothing you haven't seen before, but not an easy fight. Take it down, and you're rewarded with a final battle against a troll, an ogre, and a horde of Draugr, including some of the dual-wielding burner Draugr who somehow go down easier than all 3 of the other waves. If you focus the ogre, then use the ogre to take out the Draugr and start to tear away at the troll, then use a full Spartan Rage Bar to deal heavy damage, pick up the Rage Gem on the floor to do the same thing. You tear the troll apart in an uncharacteristically smooth fight for this run. After spending an hour dying to the 2 Dark Elves, slamming through this encounter in less than 2.5 minutes on my first try felt so good. And with the Jotunheim Realm Tower returned, it's time to get Mimir's eye from inside Jormungandr, and then come face to face with Baldur, doing his best Pirates of the Caribbean impression. The first phase is simple. It's a copy-paste of his first fight, but now Freya is grabbing you throughout the battle. She also grabs Baldur though, so mashing fast enough means a free start to a combo, letting you actually land a stagger and get some damage. Which is good because Baldur has a frankly ridiculous health bar. 2 sections down, Baldur becomes vulnerable, and cutscene Kratos proceeds to give him a power-up. Now, see, Kratos, this is why we do not use weapons. The second phase doesn't complicate things too much, though he has a few new ranged attacks and moves faster than before. Focusing on parries and punishing his slams with a solid combo will slowly whittle him down. The only attack that's tough to dodge in any sort of reliable way is his AoE, which doesn't deal any damage, so I kinda just let it happen most of the time. I dodge if I can, but it's not really anything to worry about. He does really try to use the camera against me at one point, but we get through it in one piece. At which point cutscene Kratos decides that once was not enough and decides to use the blades to enhance Baldur. And how many times do I have to tell you, old man, that we do not use weapons? This change to Baldur's moveset is even tougher. The slam now leaves an explosive after effect, which is a great time to use the Rage Talisman if you have it ready, but the tracking fire is able to follow with a surprising amount of accuracy. The big issue here is that Freya starts spawning minions, which Baldur thankfully damages as well. Whenever these mobs get summoned, it usually means it's time to back off for a little bit. Frustratingly, Atreus also isn't present during this phase, so no resurrection stone here. I suppose this works because that means I can save it for the final phase. The arena becomes much smaller, and Baldur starts to use multiple slams at a time, making large portions of the arena dangerous. At the end of the day though, it's more of the same until you bring him down to 1 health bar left, at which point cutscene Kratos finally realizes that the key to killing Baldur is to just not use weapons. And after displaying his new wisdom and monologuing for a while, Baldur finally goes down. But it's not over yet, is it? After all, there are still 9 Valkyries to kill. And at this point, I knew I'd need to be properly equipped, so I started letting myself use the axe and chains to solve optional puzzles too, going back through all the old areas and stocking up on better equipment. I'm not going to go over any of the side quests because none of them were particularly notable or difficult, but I punched my way through those as I got everything I could to prepare to try to see how many Valkyries I can punch my way through. I still wasn't using Atreus to attack, but I did decide to let him use Ratatoskr for health or rage recovery. He's still being a pacifist, and I knew I'd need the boost for some of these tougher fights. After farming Niflheim for a while, which, by the way, was an absolutely miserable experience without weapons, I started with Hildur. She's one of the simpler Valkyries, only having the basic moves and an easy-to-block icicle barrage, but with some solid Niflheim gear and using rage to rack up fast damage, Hildur isn't much of an obstacle at all. Being in Niflheim does give her a timer, but so long as we enter the maze with full rage and use Ratatoskr for some rage recovery, we're able to rush her down with time to spare. I went to Rota next, who introduces the unblockable grab attacks. The sweeping attack not only doesn't do too much damage even if we get hit, but a successful dodge means an easy opportunity for damage. The jumping slam is a much tighter dodge and much scarier on the damage front, but similarly gives us a good opportunity to attack. Beyond those, Rota doesn't have anything special. Mastering those dodges and using Spartan Rage gives us our second helmet. Traveling to Alfheim, we took on Olrun next. Olrun has the same jumping attack, but after fighting Rota, it's nothing we haven't already learned to dodge. She does introduce an attack that becomes the bane of my existence, this unblockable arena-length lunge with her wing. I have a really hard time deciphering if she's doing an attack to block or the lunge. She's not tanky enough for it to be a problem, but it is definitely something that I will need to work on as we continue through this roster. Next, we head to Midgard to start on the 4 Valkyries there. I started with Ýr at the mountain, and she turned out to be my first major roadblock. Going into the Valkyries, I didn't think that Sigrun would actually be possible, namely for a move that she takes from Ýr. Ýr flies into the air and does a full arena burst of damage. It cannot be parried and it cannot be blocked. Much like Modi, the game wants you to throw your axe to knock her out of the air, which we can't do. However, after getting thrashed for a while, I realized that I can interrupt her attack by entering Spartan Rage. As you may have noticed, whenever I enter Spartan Rage, every enemy in the game is staggered out of whatever they're doing so long as they're close enough. Using this, we can run towards her, enter Spartan Rage, and then exit before we lose too much of our meter. The positive of this is that we now have a reliable way to dodge every attack in her arsenal. The minus is that we can no longer use the damage burst the Spartan Rage usually gives us, which means this fight is the first fight that will take a long time. However, with sheer patience and a little help from Ratatoskr, she does eventually go down. This also means that Modi and Magni would have likely been a lot easier if I was just using Spartan Rage to stagger them out of that attack that was doing half of my health in damage. But hindsight is 20/20, and we still made it through that fight, so it all worked out. Geirdrafl, or Geirdrafl, not sure how to pronounce that one, is next, and frankly her name is harder to say than her boss fight was to execute. Her ranged projectiles aren't too difficult to dodge, and even if you do mix up the blocked and dodged rings, they do so little damage that it's not a problem. Even her unblockable shockwave is reliably followed up with one of the easiest to parry scythe swings, making it a reliable source of damage and a nice palate cleanser after Ýr. After that, I loop back to Muspelheim. Now, I've been intermittently doing the challenges on my way through the Valkyries, and most have gone pretty smoothly. There were only a couple of close calls, particularly in the challenge where you have to kill enemies within a specific area. Fists and finishers move enemies so much that it turns into a major struggle to actually get a kill. After a long series of battles, however, we do eventually reach Gondul, fists only. Outside of Ýr, Gondul gives us the toughest fight. Her damage is higher than other Valkyries, she's incredibly aggressive, and if you aren't careful with your positioning as you prepare to punish, it's very possible to be trapped by the lava and unable to punish her without sacrificing health. I also found a trick that'll help me a lot later. After I dodge back from the hammer slam, I not only have the option to roll, but I can sprint forward to duck around the follow-up hammer swing, giving me a massive window to punish and avoiding any potential mistimed dodge to get around the heavy blow. The fight starts out pretty rough, and we have a pretty close call, but Gondul does go down just as simply as the rest. Next is Kara, who I have been dreading. Kara summons minions for her fight, and we do not do enough damage to rush them down, despite Kara being one of the lowest leveled Valkyries, which means we are going to do most of this fight surrounded. Her usual weakness is her small health bar, but with our fists doing so little damage, that won't account for much. At first, the name of the game is abusing the stagger from parrying to get combos on her or her Draugr, but things complicate as soon as she starts to summon shield Draugr, who start blocking our counterattacks. As soon as that happens, the fight starts to get really hairy and I start playing very poorly. But after one most certainly perfectly executed and not at all greedy fight, there's only one more Valkyrie left. And it's Gunnar, who was supposed to serve as our tutorial for the Valkyries. She has no special moves, but serves as a great focus exercise, as I make sure I am nailing the timing of the basic parries, a skill that will become absolutely invaluable against the real challenge of this run. And that is Sigrun. With 16 health bar segments, this fight is an endurance test at its truest. My successful run ended up taking over 20 minutes of slowly punching her health bar down. She has a ton of attacks, many of which have multiple follow-ups to keep you on your toes the whole time. There are a couple attacks though that are reliably safe to punish. Whenever she finishes jumping or diving, you can do a full or almost full combo against her. I say almost full because she has a habit of timing a counterattack so that if you use the last hit of your combo, you'll get hit. So we end up missing the finisher pretty frequently in order to avoid damage. She also likes to interrupt combos with the shield, but a quick shield bash means that you can rack up even more damage pretty quickly. Like with Ир and Gondul, we can't safely use Spartan Rage since they have attacks we need to cancel. With so many airborne attacks that do so much damage, we not only need to conserve our rage, but be able to counter sometimes 3 or 4 unblockable attacks in a row. Failing to exit Spartan Rage can mean that you're forced to use Ratatoskr to recover your rage, and you definitely want to be saving that squirrel for healing. Even at the start of the fight, Sigrun pretty handily deals more damage than any other Valkyrie, but as the fight progresses, her damage gets higher and higher until she can handily two-shot you after almost 20 minutes of gameplay, which, at one point, she did, and it hurt. The margin for error is razor thin, and greed is punished with half of your health bar. But after 20 minutes of patient play and multiple attempts getting her right to the end, we use the Niflheim Charm and Ratatoskr to heal ourselves from all small mistakes to finally reach the end of a solid attempt. Yes! I did it! Oh my god, I just fucking did it. Oh, that fight had to be like 20 minutes long. With no weapons, no runic attacks, no arrows from Atreus, and even no resurrection stone, Sigrun, Baldur, Magni, Modi, a dragon, and a horde of trolls have been punched to death. And with that, the run still technically failed. There were a couple places we had to use Atreus, leading to a total of 5 non-revenant enemies shot with the bow, and 1 enemy who we were forced to use the axe on. But even with that, I'm pretty satisfied with this run. I got infinitely better with barehanded combos than I thought I'd ever be at God of War, and I did not think Sigrun would be physically possible when I started. Anyway, the fists don't have a skill tree in Ragnarok, so we'll see if and when I'm ready to try to take that on. For now, punch the like and subscribe button, and come watch me do other stupid shit on Twitch. Until next time.